Hello, welcome to another Q&A session with BTG Legal. I am Arjun Paleri. Joining me today are Mr. Ananda Shom and my colleague Jaya Ramachandran. Our topic today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our Q&A with Ananda will be divided into two parts. This session is part one, where we'll explore the background of diversity at a workplace. With some questions we will pose to Ananda. Jaya, over to you.
Thank you, Arjun. Hello, I'm Jaya Ramachandran, and I will begin by introducing Ananda. Ananda is the global supply chain lead for Pfizer in India. He is responsible for driving the supply chain strategy for India cluster and Indo-China markets. He is also in charge of heading the D&I strategy for Pfizer in India. So he's the perfect guest to answer some of our questions and share his perspective. Ananda, it's a pleasure to have you join us today for this Q&A session.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on this podcast, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you.
So, while diversity at the workplace has always been encouraged, there is now a concerted effort to widely promote and instill D&I at workplaces. So, my first question to you is, what does DE&I mean at a workplace?
Thanks for the question, Jaya. To me, diversity is to be inclusive. It's all about harnessing the richness of diverse backgrounds, genders, experience, which in turn helps us to have a healthier work environment and definitely a better business outcomes, rather than having unilateral approach towards things. And in my career, I've seen that work more than often. Just to articulate my point on the diversity of backgrounds and experience, during the recent pandemic, being from a supply chain background, we had to ensure business continuity at more than many locations. And for that, we had to get the support of our service providers across more than many locations spread across all 30 states in India. This is where, while the younger colleagues from my team who were coming up with a lot of contemporary ways of doing things, bringing in digitalization, but getting the support of the service providers to come down to the warehouses, because there are certain rules you just can't be doing it remotely. And this is where the more experienced lot from my team, they were able to use their relationship with the service providers, which were built over so many years, and they were able to get them to the workplace day in and day out, especially during the peak of pandemic. So clearly you had one set of people bringing in contemporary skill sets, ensuring that we are able to reach out to people through digital medium. On the other hand, you had the more experienced people using their age-old relationship with the service providers and getting them to work and ensuring business continuity. So to me, it was a great mix of contemporary skill sets, experience, relationships, which ensured business continuity during such difficult times.
Thanks, Ananda. In your experience, how have you seen diversity being implemented at the workplace?
There are more than many things every organization does to kind of put diversity into practice. The more popular ones are to ensure that make policies and ensure that women colleagues are comfortable at the workplace. Mothers who have just delivered have leave policies so that they are able to spend time with the children and also manage their work, getting into sabbaticals. Um, but one particular experience that I've had in my career kind of stands out, and this is one organization uh, which I had joined. The first thing when I enter into the organization, I see that a differently abled person in the reception chair. We are all used to seeing a very stereotyped receptionist when we go down to any organization. But when I entered into this organization and I was greeted by a differently abled a receptionist, it sent a very, very strong message. It kind of, it kind of told me that here is an organization which is walking the talk and not just, looking at DNI as a metric. And that to me is all about being inclusive and respecting diversity, and also kind of recognizing what each person brings on the table, irrespective of the background. So apart from this one example, I would also like to speak about breaking stereotypes where uh, one of my colleagues uh, from, not from India, but she is a warehouse manager. How many warehouse managers do you see as as a woman leader? So uh, she is not only doing a great job, and again during the pandemic, she got her entire team members to rally behind her and support our business continuity during the peak of pandemic. So again, more than often we have seen that we get stereotyped in our thought process while hiring or while appointing people in for the respective roles. But some of these examples just show us that we can have a little bit broad outlook when we hire people for roles, and of course also give them responsibilities.
Thank you, Ananda. Those are actually very good examples of breaking the stereotype and breaking the myth.
So Ananda, I have a question for you next, and I think it's basically about a case where diversity practices, or rather, the question is, what diversity practices have you seen as not getting the desired results?
So Arjun, more than often we have seen in many organizations diversity being looked at as a metric. The moment you start looking at diversity as a metric, that's when things start failing. While you can while you can kickstart the whole initiative with a big bang and uh, kind of coming up with certain fancy numbers to pursue, it starts and it fizzles out. Unless and until you have a cultural shift in the way we think and the way we practice diversity, it's not going to sustain. Because more than often, people don't see this as a value that it is bringing to the organization, both in making the place a healthier place to work, as well as translating all those diverse views and thought processes into business outcomes. So, long story short, this has to be a cultural shift rather than looking at it as a metric.
Thank you, Ananda. I think that's a very valuable perspective, because a lot of things ultimately rest and rely on metrics. And I think you're absolutely right. Looking at things purely from one lens may not be the most appropriate, especially in diversity. So I think moving on to the next question, and I think this is probably related to a certain extent, is can every workplace have the same diversity approach?
Well, while we all like to have a very standardized approach, to me, it doesn't. Diversity doesn't. Is not a one size fit all. And this is through the various interactions that I've had with various countries within APAC, for instance. Um, Diversity for them, I mean, for each country can be quite different. For instance, in one of the countries, diversity is all about um, having women leadership, because for them the gender ratio is pretty healthy. In fact, they have more women folk in their workplace, and for them, hence, but very few of them actually into the leadership position. So in some countries, it's not about hitting the gender ratio. It's all about having more representation of women leaders. And in the same way, I would say in a couple of other places, I think that diversity is all about uh, um, promoting people with who are differently abled into your workplace. Likewise in a couple of other places, we have seen that diversity is all about also promoting LGBT, which again is not widely spoken about. Um, and when you come down to countries like India, Pakistan, and a couple of other neighboring countries, it's all about hitting the the gender ratio, especially in a couple of roles where you have typically more male folks rather than women folks. But then, um, as we move towards the digital world, we are now seeing that shift happening. The typical stereotype roles where you used to have more male folks, we now are seeing more and more women folks, stepping into these roles. So again, to sum it up, it may not be a one size fit all. Each market, each country can have a different perspective towards diversity.
I think that's very helpful, Anand. I think a lot of times diversity is looked upon as a formula that can be applied repetitively, and I think your perspective certainly gives us an insight into how things could operate within the organization, especially an MNC with operations across the globe. I'll request Jaya to pose the last question to you. And yeah, over to you, Jaya.
Thank you, Arjun. Ananda, what are the top things a company should consider when planning a diversity strategy for the organization?
On this, the first and foremost is to have commitment from the leadership. It has to be top down. It has to be a part of every leader's agenda, goal, whatever you call it. Unless and until they prioritize this, it's not going to percolate down to the organization. That's the first and foremost. Um, Second, once you have put it into the priority list, then you would need to kind of shape the policies to support this whole the diversity agenda. Something which is create a framework which makes the entire workplace far more conducive for a diverse environment. Uh, Third is perhaps taking bold bets and supporting the colleagues from very diverse backgrounds, because as people managers, more than often we would like to stick to stereotypes. So people for each function would like to have people with experience from the same background, same curriculum, and they would not like to really experiment too much when it comes to hiring talent. Now, this is where, as managers, we would need to take some big bets and ensure that we are harnessing some of the talent from diverse backgrounds, diverse experience, and making the making your team far more rich in their thought process. And lastly, I think as people managers, we would also need to invest in grooming people who do not come from the stereotype backgrounds. Obviously, when you are getting, when you are hiring people from diverse backgrounds, they will not be able to deliver immediately because they will take some time to put a foot into the door. But once they kind of understand the deliverables, more than often, at least as a people manager, I've seen that people who come from diverse backgrounds succeed much more than the stereotypes that we typically hire. So these are few points that I would bring on the table when it comes to creating a framework for diversity and inclusion.
I think that's helpful, Ananda, and I think those varied insights certainly, do give a very broad sense of the important elements of implementing a DNE strategy. And lastly, thank you for participating and agreeing to do the Q&A with us. And this is only a partial thanks, because we'll be speaking to you again soon for part 2 of the Q&A to actually discuss elements regarding implementation of a diversity strategy at the workplace. Thank you, Jaya, and we will all speak again soon.
Thank you so much, Arjun, Jaya. Have a wonderful day ahead.
So that was an interesting session with Ananda today. And as we end this particular part of the Q&A session, I wanted to spend a few minutes to assess the key takeaways from our Q&A today. Firstly, diversity at the workplace cannot be constrained within metrics. There are softer elements which must be considered by each party implementing diversity at the workplace. Priorities for diversity at the workplace will very likely vary from company to company. There is no single formula that will apply. Each company must consider its priorities when preparing its strategy for diversity at the workplace. Lastly, three important elements to strongly encourage diversity at the workplace are understanding what works for the company, participation of the senior management in all initiatives, and providing development opportunities to individuals through learning and development and mentoring programs. Thank you all for listening into this Q&A session. We will return with more Q&A sessions and also a follow-up to our discussion with Ananda. Thank you.